Good morning, it's January 23rd, and this is To My Liberal Friends. Trust the science. And that was the mantra from the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease during the COVID pandemic. It was repeated over and over by the head of the government agency, Dr. Anthony Fauci. The result was a government lockdown with businesses being shuttered and schools being closed. The liberals in the government bought this line of reasoning hook, line, and sinker. The head of the major teachers union, Randy Weingarten, collaborated with the CDC to ensure that schools were closed and kept closed. The losers in all these actions were the business owners, the workers in those businesses, and most of all, students across the nation. Test scores have plummeted, and some of these students will never catch up. And the truth of the matter is that low-income students have been impacted the most. Now, we all listened to the debate about the origin of the virus. Was it created in a lab in Wuhan, China, as they researched the gain-of-function concepts? Did it originate with bats and then jump to human beings? All this speculation was shot down by Dr. Fauci and his cohorts at NIS. Dr. Fauci was on TV more than politicians and seemed to relish his celebrity status. And as I said, he preached to us that we had to trust the science. We had to socially distance ourselves by 6 feet. But the time is not bearing out Dr. Fauci's statements. In testimony before the House subcommittee investigating the federal government's COVID policies, Fauci admitted that some of his, quote, scientific recommendations during the pandemic were not based on science, but purely arbitrary judgments by him. That's right, he just pulled these recommendations out of the air and mandated them for the nation. Most notably, according to subcommittee chair Brad Weinstrup, who is also a physician, Fauci acknowledged that his, quote, recommendation that people socially distance by 6 feet, rather than say 3, 12, or any other number, to minimize the virus transmission was, quote, not likely based on scientific data, but sort of appeared to him, end quote. I guess he had a vision. But Fauci was unrepentant about the deleterious effects his randomly chosen recommendations had on American life, most notably school shutdowns throughout the country, since few schools had the room to separate classrooms by 6 feet apart. They closed businesses for similar reasons. Massive federal spending, much of it wasted, to try to keep businesses afloat and workers paid, kids prevented from playing with their friends, and so on. Even worse, in contrast with what every parent who observed how little their children were being taught on the online classes could see, Fauci still denied that there was any proof that the school shutdowns caused learning loss at all. Is he that obtuse? In reality, a multitude of studies issued by reputable research organizations have confirmed such losses. For instance, the Center for School and Student Progress, operating in conjunction with the Northwest Evaluation Association, a nonprofit educational testing group, reported in nearly all grades achievement gains during 22-23 fell short of pre-pandemic trends. More precisely, the study found that the average student will need an equivalent of 4.1 additional months of schooling to catch up in reading and 4.5 months in math, and that marginalized, that is, minority low-income students, remain the furthest from the recovery. But wait, there was more damning testimony. In contrast to Fauci's reluctance to admit that his policies had any harmful societal effects, his former boss, Dr. Francis Collins, who ran the National Institutes of Health during COVID, admitted that same week before Congress that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and other public health bureaucracies had flubbed the pandemic reaction, albeit with the best of intentions. Quoting him, he said, if you're a public health official and you're trying to make a decision, you have this very narrow view of what is the right decision is, and that is something that will save a life, end quote. With this perspective, Collins acknowledged, quote, you attach zero value to whether this actually totally disrupts people's lives, ruins the economy, and has many kids kept out of school in a way that never quite recovered, end quote. But Fauci's record in dealing with COVID looks even worse, considering his long dogmatic insistence that the virus must have originated a Chinese wet market a few miles from the Wuhan Biological Laboratory, which was engaged in gain-of-function research and receiving U.S. funding from his organization. Early in 2020, Fauci appeared at a press conference with President Trump, citing a research paper by Dr. Christian Andersen and published in the Journal of Nature Science to support his claim. What Fauci failed to disclose was he himself had commissioned and edited the study, a fact only recently discovered by House Republicans. As Andersen finally admitted, Fauci made clear that he wanted the study to disprove the lab leak theory. These facts were only uncovered in a report issued by the House subcommittee, which also found evidence that Collins himself had been complicit in asking that the study put down the lab leak hypothesis. Notably, when President Trump still pursued the question of whether the virus could have originated in the lab, which common sense would suggest given the nature of the lab's work, he was ridiculed by scientists and in the media. But the lesson of this story isn't that science shouldn't be subordinate to politics. Rather, as Dr. Collins' testimony indicates, it is the job of political leaders to supervise in a responsible way how science is conducted. For instance, preventing U.S. tax dollars from funding gain-of-function research in Chinese labs that could theoretically produce bioweapons. Recently, there was a column in the New York Times by liberal writer David Leonhardt. He lamented that the tendency of liberals, quote, to adopt positions that are not based on empirical evidence and wish away inconvenient facts, end quote. Among these positions are the notion that standardized tests are worthless or counterproductive, and a reluctance to acknowledge that extended COVID school closures were a mistake, that policing can reduce crime, and that drug legalization can damage public health, end quote. He's right, and it's up to the elected leaders of government to ensure that they do not let their political views skew things that the public just for public political gain. It could happen on the left, and it could happen on the right. And we, the public, have to start holding them accountable when we see it happening. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening.